Today I'm going to make two different cards using a splash of colour in two different ways, and it's so easy that anyone can make it. Hello and welcome. It's time for another Take Two with Therese at Altenew, and I'm really excited to be sharing today's technique with you. I've got the beautiful Courageous You stamp set, and this is a very large outline image of a beautiful bouquet. So there's two big flowers and some gorgeous leaves all in one stamp. Now what I'm doing here is just laying out my stamp over top of my piece of cardstock. This is a piece of watercolor paper from Altenew, and what I did that for was it's just going to tell me where I need to add my splash of color on the cardstock. And I'm using a wet on wet technique here, so I've come in and I've added some clean clear water where I think the flowers are going to roughly be on this panel, and then I can just drop in my color. Now I'm adding two different shades of color to my flowers, and I want them to mix. So how I do that is I just drop them in while the paint is still wet, and I've added water to that, so they're going to mix and meld a little bit. If you want the colors to be more defined, then you can dry the colors in between and sort of layer up your colors that way. So I'm using the stamp here to sort of reposition and work out exactly where my color needs to be on the panel. And before I come in and add a totally different color, I do want to make sure that these floral colors are dry. I have got my colors swatched out here, so I just sort of held it up against them to work out which greens I wanted to use. And now I'm doing the same thing again. I'm adding some clean clear water to my cardstock panel and then just dropping in the color again. And because the floral color is dry, it's not going to mix too much and give me that muddy color that I don't want. So after my panel had dried completely, I did run it through my die cutting machine just to flatten it out a little bit. And I want to stamp this very large stamp from the Courageous You, the floral bouquet, over top, just roughly aligning it where my watercolor is on my panel. So this is where the Misty comes into its own. Now, like I said, this is quite a smooth cardstock, but it's still watercolor cardstock. So I want to be able to restamp this a couple of times. And I'm using the Obsidian ink here, which is a nice, rich black pigment ink. So it's going to really make this image pop on the watercolor background. I did hold the cardstock in place just by adding some tape behind the panel before I actually put it in my Misty. And these stamp positioning tools, if you don't have one, I highly recommend them. They do make life so much easier with such a large stamp. I came in with some of the jet black ink spray here, and here's a word of warning. On the watercolor cardstock, it does take a very long time for it to dry. So you do either need to set it aside or hit it with the heat tool just to speed things up. Alright, so we're working on the second design, and I'm doing it a little bit differently this time. I'm actually stamping my image first, and I have moved the stamp and the cardstock around in the Misty, and it does give it a very different look. The Obsidian ink is also waterproof, so that means that you can use it with your watercolors, but this time I'm not actually using watercolors. I'm using the crisp dye inks to watercolor with. Very easy to do. So basically, if you've got some dye inks in your stash, you can do this technique. All you need is a slick surface to add the ink to. I just smooshed the ink onto the surface. You can use a plate or an acetate sheet, anything that you have, some water, and a paintbrush. Anything will work. And basically what I'm doing is adding water to the dye ink, picking up the color with my brush and loosely painting it on my images. Now these, because I've used the Obsidian ink, it's not bleeding, the color stays nice and strong, but if I wanted to, I could align it back up. I'm just not game to do that and restamp it. But you could certainly do that if you needed to. Some people actually redraw over their images after they've finished colouring with a marker. I'm not game to do that either. Let me know in the comments below if you either restamp or come in with a marker and draw over your image at the end. I wonder how many people actually do that. I would be very nervous. So the inks here that I've chosen are the Sweet Dreams blues. I've started with the lightest colour, and then I did come in and I couldn't help myself. I did have to add some shading. I was planning just to do more of a wash of colour, but seriously, this only took a matter of minutes to do. And by adding the ink here with the water, there wasn't a lot of water, so it did dry really quickly. And if I wanted to speed things up, I could just hit it with my heat tool on the low setting. The darker colours here, I think, just by adding them on the inside of the petals, you know, where the petals touch each other, it did just add some depth, which I really do like on flowers. But it really just is giving a splash of colour to a flower that's already amazing. And I think these flowers look really nice, even just stamped out with no colour at all. You could block colour some colour behind them as well. Or I've actually used this image where I've done stripes of colour and then stamped the flower over top. So really quick ideas to add a fun splash of colour to a beautiful image. So the greens here, I did just choose some muted ones. It was the Limeade and the lime. And on the leaves, I actually came in with the blue to add a bit of shading, which is just, I think it was on my brush. Rather than, I didn't want to make the colours too dark. And just in keeping with the other card that I made, because I like to sort of keep my cards similar but different, I did add some splatters of the blue ink that was already on my mat. So the two sentiments on the cards today, I decided to white heat emboss on some black cardstock. I chose one sentiment from the Crystal Frames stamp set and the other one's from the Stone Mosaic stamp set, and both of these sets have amazing, very versatile sentiments. They are two of my go-to sentiment sets. I have a few that I just keep heading back to. I like the fonts, I like the sentiments, they work on a variety of cards. And I think that these particular cards would make a great gift set of cards. They actually were really quick and easy to put together. A lot of fun. You could do a whole range of different colors. You could do all your gift cards in the same color and then just move the images around and just get different looks. You could add different sentiments for different occasions. I had a lot of fun with this technique, and I hope that you're inspired to give a splash of colour a try, whether you do it with watercolours or whether you do it with dye inks. There are so many options, and I hope you have fun. So looking forward to seeing you again here real soon. Till next time, bye.
Hello crafters, Jen here. For more tips, techniques, tutorials, and to discover which paper crafting products are right for you, subscribe to Altenew's YouTube channel. Make sure to hit the notification bell so you don't miss any videos. Thanks for watching.